Hello everyone and welcome to a special video on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. I'm here joined by Danny Cathro, Silver Pro, and lover of Sacred Cat. Danny, how you doing?
Doing wonderful. I mean, I did not love Sacred Cat as much as others this Pro Tour.
Yeah.
I neglected to play it, despite my best thoughts. I mean, like I think I definitely could have played it for sure, but for some reason I decided against it.
Well, the only person I know who played Sacred Cat the Pro Tour beat Michael Hinderocker, and the other person got second. So it looks like you might have made a mistake.
It's true. I think it was probably a punt. My deck could have been a lot better.
Yeah, but we'll get into that later. On screen, you're going to see Danny's deck here. We're having some technical issues with Danny's computer, so we're not going to be able to put him or myself up on the screen. But we're going to have Danny's deck, and this video is just going to be kind of talking about Danny's preparation and work towards the PT, since Danny did get to play the Pro Tour, but he doesn't have CC to come on and talk about that kind of stuff. So we're just going to have a little one-on-one chat right here and go over all this. So you ready, Danny?
I am ready.
Awesome. So let's get started. So the format, you start to get ready for the Pro Tour. Ixalan was a weird format because we're halfway through the lifespan now. How did you start preparation for the Pro Tour?
So I mostly focused on draft. I just thought that the standard format would mostly sort itself out a bunch, and so that if I focused on draft, I would be able to, like, that time would be the best spent at the beginning. So that's what I did, and I thought the draft format was really interesting, and I felt like I learned a lot about it definitely throughout the first few weeks. So I think it was a good way to prep for this type of delayed Pro Tour for sure.
So when it comes to the limited portion, how do you feel about this format? I know it's one that a lot of people aren't really high on. Some are calling it the worst format ever. Some people say they hate it. I've heard a lot of pros say after the PT, we're just never going to draft this again. So where are you on that?
It's a little weird. Like, I felt like the drafting portions were good, and that you could, like, make meaningful decisions during the draft that could really influence how well you did. But a lot of the games play out where you don't make a lot of meaningful decisions, which is probably why a lot of the pros don't like it very much. Just because, like, once you have your deck, you kind of you jam your stuff into your opponent and you hope that it works. And I don't know, some of the games are super lame. I had a pretty rough Pro Tour. I didn't do that well at draft. Both of my decks looked like pretty reasonable and were pretty good. I had some close games, and then I lost a bunch of close matches. Like, I feel like my prep was reasonable, and sometimes you just kind of feel a little helpless in this format, which it's frustrating for sure. But
yeah, sure. If you could go back and do anything different and focus on, like, in preparation, not the actual PT games, is there anything you would have done different to maybe prepare yourself better for the Pro Tour after playing it? Or do you feel like you did a good job and all that and you just, had some of those non-games at the PT?
So for the limited section, I felt like I was mostly prepared. I mean, you always could do a little bit more. But for the most part, yeah, I felt pretty confident. In standard, I, in theory, liked my main deck. I think I won.
We're gonna get there. So
okay, good.
So I just want to focus on limited and then transition to standard for the bulk of the video. So
cool.
Yeah. So when it comes,
that sounds great.
Yeah, I was gonna say one last thing when it comes to limited. Do you feel like it's solved? Like, it's just like
the format?
When it comes to draft in particular.
I mean, kind of. Like, so this draft format's really strange. So, like, a good example, in my first draft, I opened a hostage taker in pack 1, pick 1. And so you're, like, highly incentivized to try to at least touch blue or black. And both of them were, like, medium open, but not really open. And so I just I played blue-black, and my deck was fine. It was, like, pretty reasonable. I had hostage taker, I had a 1 with the wind, and 2 Mark of the Vampires. So I kind of got to use some of the cards that are good with hostage taker that also pair well with those cards. So I had, like, a dive down and a Siren's Ruse. I played one of those because I had a lot of pirates and stuff, and my deck was totally reasonable. I feel I had some complicated games that I lost, and but like what I was gonna go with that is that the format is strange in that you have to, like, draft the open colors, but then some of the colors are distinctly stronger than the other ones, and so you kind of, like, hope that your seat is in some of the stronger color pairs, but if you try to force one of those pairs, you're going to get really tight on playables. And so I think like most people understand the draft pretty well, and it's just kind of it's a little weird on which deck you fall in and how good that deck can actually be. So
Gotcha. Do you feel like the format being so much longer in its life cycle compared to normally, like, was that an advantage or disadvantage to you? Do you feel like more people knew what was up than normal, or do you feel like that extra time and stuff was more advantageous for you?
I think it was probably less advantageous for me. I normally do pretty well at the beginning of formats, but I mean, I definitely learned a lot, so I was advantaged in that way. But trying to compare how much it helped me versus how much it helped the average Pro Tour player is a little difficult.
That's fair.
But I mean, I guess, but yeah, it's probably about sixes. I assume. I assume it's about the same.
All right. I was just curious. I'm sure that's something that a lot of people who didn't play the Pro Tour are curious about. With if
For sure.
moving forward, if Watsy's going to do it.
Yeah, I think they're going to go back to the old one, which for me is a lot more exciting. I saw a bunch of people on Twitter talking about how in the standard portion, like there's no innovation, like practically the same deck that won this week.
Yeah.
But when standard's been out for so long, it's definitely hard to like innovate. Like the Magic Online has had standard for so long that a lot of it has been flushed out, and you can get small edges by just having cards that people aren't expecting. But I think I prefer the kind of Wild West type of Pro Tour where it's a new format and it's an arms race for the new tech and stuff. I think that's more fun.
Okay, cool, very interesting. So now let's move on to standard. So you've waited a little bit in the standard life cycle. I'm assuming you waited till like after Worlds and or probably around Nationals to really start getting into it.
For sure.
So I'm assuming you started with tokens because I have a little insider here where we played some games on Modo. I think it was like week 2, and you were on Abzan tokens. So was this the deck that caught your eye very early on from the last format where you had played tokens, or did you just see and like, oh well, this is a strategy I've liked before? Like, how did you get going with the ball? Like the ball get going this way?
It's mostly I'm a glutton for punishment. So, but like I like fringe strategies a lot. I was actually really intrigued. So during Pascal Maynard's during one of his interviews in the top 8, he talked about how he doesn't like to play the best deck, even though he's like Pascal Maynard's crazy good. But he is like, well, I'm not as good at Owen or Brad Nelson or Huey or right, and he's like he names people that he thinks are better than him at standard, and that he likes to try to play a deck that is different than them to try to eke out edges. And I've generally tried to go with that same strategy where I like to play a deck that is unique in some way that people aren't expecting so that I can have some type of advantage when I'm playing against a really good player. I'm not always saying that it's the best strategy. I think playing the best deck and playing it well is probably the better way to like improve quickly, and it's probably a really good strategy to like move up the ranks and to really stretch yourself a lot. But tokens is kind of one that I leaned on where I felt like it was a unique deck that I could build in a different way that could catch people off guard. I definitely felt like my main deck especially was really set up well for the format, and I don't know. I think it was a fun deck. I mean, ultimately I play Magic because it's really fun, and I really enjoyed it, and so I decided that I definitely wanted to play that deck if I thought it was reasonable. So.
Gotcha. So how much time did you spend like exploring other strategies? Like, did you look into playing Team, or did you look into playing the Jabberwocky, the Mono Reds? Because I know you just said you don't want to play those decks, but you also said I don't want to play the tokens deck just because it's cute, you know?
Yeah.
So like when it comes to that kind of preparation, especially with this extra time, did you give it like a week or so, or did you kind of lean on Michael to like, because he definitely plays those decks. I think that's the biggest not an opposition, but the yin and yang of your two's relationship is that you're normally very much more like on the fringe, and he's very much like a variation of the best deck.
For sure. Yeah, Michael really is definitely great at identifying what the best deck in the format's going to be and playing some variant of it. And I think so. I do often lean on him to like kind of tell me what he thinks is really good. and if I think that's a deck that I can do well with and that I would enjoy playing, then I'll listen to his advice. And so I did play some Teamer. I played some black aggro decks. Didn't try mono red as much. I didn't personally think it would be that strong. It did pretty well. I just know in Worlds it got beat up really bad by the Teamer decks, and so I wasn't super high on the mono red list. I was more interested in the black aggro decks that were floating around, and so I tried a lot of those. Tried a lot of Teamer variants, and then tokens. That's most of what I tried with any type of like volume.
Gotcha. Okay. So there was a little bit there before we start diving into the deck here where Michael was also going to play the tokens deck. What changed there? Like what got you guys to go on the different paths? Because those that don't know that Michael played a Jabberwocky list.
Correct. Yeah, he played the base green, black, blue Teamer list. So like it's pretty much Siphoners instead of Cubs, and then more removal like Fatal Push, and then Gaunties instead of Hydras. Yeah. Like in general, that's the deck, and it still has like Whirler and Harnessed and that kind of stuff. And Vraska's Contempts was your sweet. So he was initially thinking tokens was pretty strong, and I definitely think it was still a fine choice. So the game one win percentage on tokens is like super high.
Yeah.
Like, and I also like I had a little bit of a different variant where even your aggro matchup game one win percentage was super high, which is one of the matchups where you would occasionally lose game one. But against Teamer, you just like crush game one. And but post board, they have a lot of answers to your types of strategy. And if someone wants to beat you, especially, then they can have even better answers in their sideboard that really punish you. And so that's the main thing that I think Michael was kind of worried about, is that he didn't know if the sideboard strategy was going to be good enough, and that he thought that the deck would be so weak post sideboard that he was afraid to play it.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the interesting things about your deck here. So the biggest thing that stands out to me over every other tokens list is that you're playing 4 Servo Expedition, which essentially raised the alarm but for servos. So what led you to want to play that card?
So I wanted to shore up my aggro matchups, because I felt like if I wasn't going to consistently beat aggro, I probably shouldn't be playing this deck. Like, I wanted to make sure that my aggro and my Teamer matchups were good. And so Servo Exhibition is pretty synergistic, especially with Legion's Landing. Like, you can go turn 1 Legion's Landing, turn 2 Servo Exhibition, and then it forces a removal spell out of them. And if they don't remove it, then you get to accelerate and play a turn 3 Procession or a turn 3 Ixalan's Binding or something. And so, which is pretty huge if you can make a 1/1 lifelinker that also is a rampant growth. Like, that's a pretty big deal. And so that is why I like Servo Exhibition. I thought that it was amazing against Kenra, against Night Market Lookout, all of those types of cards. And then it also is just really strong with Legion's Landing.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about Ixalan's Binding, because you mentioned it there. So you're playing 3. Normally in the the Abzan build, you'll see like 1 or 2. What led you to go with 3 Ixalan Bindings and only 1 cast out?
So I honestly, at this point, I'd probably just play all 4 Ixalan's Bindings. So cast out is occasionally good if you want to hold up mana and be able to represent multiple spells. But Ixalan's Binding was like a 2 or a 3 for 1 so many times. It was completely insane. So in a lot of matchups, especially post-board, there are only certain cards that you really care about. And if you can guarantee that your opponent can't play those cards, then you're in a really good position. So, for example, against Mono Red, he played a turn 3 Rampaging Ferocidon, and then I Ixalan's Bindinged it. And then he played a turn 4 Hazaret, and I Ixalan's Binding that. And then I was like, okay, we're done here. Like, the game is over. You have no more Rampaging Ferocidons. You have no more Hazarets. All you have are a bunch of 1 and 2 drops, and you literally can't kill me. And he just conceded. Like, the game was done. And Cast Out wouldn't do that. Like, in that game, I think he had 2 Hazarets in his hand.
Gotcha.
And it's also pretty relevant even against random cards like pre-board. Against Teamer, it came up multiple times where I would exile their Glorybringer because that's the main card that you're worried about pre-board, and then they just can't play any more Glorybringers. So your life total is very easy to manage because you don't have to worry about any hasty threats out of Teamer. And then in the mirror, it's much stronger.
Yeah, it's insane in the mirror.
Cast out. Yeah, and it's completely insane. Yeah, you can't cast any anointed processions.
That's game over. Even if you don't hit any of the other pieces, that is normally game over.
Yep. And so I think it's really strong. Oh, the Scarab God's another great card that you like. People play multiple copies of because it's so powerful, but you can strand the expensive cards in their hand. I don't know. So I was really impressed with Ixalan's Binding. I think it was probably one of the better cards in my deck this past weekend. It was really, really strong.
Awesome. So let's move on to your sideboard here. You have Deadeye Tracker is the first one that sticks out to me. So what's that card's purpose?
So it's mostly for against Godfarer's Gift. I thought it'd be really powerful out of this deck because if they have any main deck removal, then they're going to cut it. And then a lot of the decks just didn't have any main deck removal, and they definitely weren't going to be sideboarding and spot removal against you. And so it was a creature that can interact with Godfarer's Gifts really profitably, which I thought was really strong. And then the other matchup that I thought it would be good in was against Control, where they're going to be cutting a lot of their spot removal, and you'll be able to interact with Gearhulks and search for Ascanta and really slow down a lot of their synergies while also grinding out the game.
Did it play out that way, or would you not play against a lot of those decks at the PT?
I played against 4 aggro decks and 6 teamer decks. So I didn't play any of this.
Okay, all right. Well, let's talk about Driven to Despair then, 'cause that's the other card that really sticks out that doesn't see a lot of play in these sideboards. So what was the plan with that card?
So Michael and I were talking about how we would be able to beat Teamer postboard, because that matchup gets pretty difficult because they get to keep a lot of their clock, cut a lot of their spot removal, and bring in negates if they're just Teamer. And then if they have a black splash, they can also bring in duress and negate. And then I even played against... So BBD was playing 2 Rivers Rebuke in his sideboard for this matchup, and so like they have a lot of hate, and so we were trying to come up with an alternate strategy where we could beat Teamer, and so I was trying to think of how they sideboard and a way that we could sideboard that would punish it. And in general, they cut all of their spot removal, and so your Legion's Landing, Servo Exhibition, Start Finish, Anointed Priest are just going to sit around on the table, and Driven Despair was the best way that I could think of trying to punish that sideboard strategy, where they just leave in threats and negate or that type of interaction. And it worked sometimes, so I brought it in a bunch. I won, I think, 2 or 3 games by making them discard 3, I draw 3 on like turn 4 or 5, and that was generally good enough. I know I played one Teamer opponent where I made him discard... I think it was Sultai. I made him discard Vraska in his last land, and then I drew 3 cards. And so that was definitely powerful. I don't think it's probably good enough. I think if you want to play this deck and you want to be able to fight Teamer, you would have to come up with a better sideboard strategy. I didn't think Driven Despair was consistent or powerful enough to really lean on.
Gotcha. So that brings me to my next question. Are you happy with this deck selection post-PT? Would you run it back again if you had to play the tournament again tomorrow? What are you thinking?
I definitely changed things. So I won all 10 game 1s that I played.
Okay.
Yeah. So the game 1 deck, and like most of them weren't close. I had some horrible hands and would still win. So the strategy is really strong, but it's definitely it's easy to interact with, and a lot of people are definitely prepared for interacting. And so post board, I think I went 2-4 against Teamer, and those losses include losing games 2 and 3. And I think that might not be totally indicative of how the matchup plays out. But BBD is a great example where he pretty much decided that he wanted to beat this deck, and so he dedicated enough sideboard slots that he would. And it's a really hard matchup based on what he was able to bring in. And so I wouldn't recommend playing this exact list. I think my main deck was really strong, really, really good. It was really tough to lose to aggro, and your general strategy is just so strong against Teamer pre-board if they don't have negates, or different types of counter magic, it's really hard for them to compete. So I really like the game 1 matchups, but you'd have to come up with a better sideboard strategy than what I had come up with in order for me to want to play this.
Okay, gotcha. So, anything else you want to say about this deck or the Pro Tour? Any fun stories or anything like that you want to share?
Oh, I played Brad Nelson in a round. That was kind of fun, and
Standard or limited?
so I played him in both actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and so I played him first in standard, and I was like kind of missing land drops, and then I hit my 4th land, and I pass, and I'm dead. I have like a start finish, but that's it. And he just attacks with everything, and then I'm like, yeah, you got me, good game. And I was like, yeah, my out is if I drew Settle the Wreckage. He's like, oh, you're playing that card? Yeah, I would never have played around that card. Does anyone else playing this? Let's play that card. And he was like, kind of had this like little like, wait. Do I need to be playing around this in the future? Or are you just weird, and are you just playing Settle the Wreckage? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I just am. He's like, okay, good. I'm not going to play around that. But he was just like, had this little internal conversation out loud about whether he thought other people would be playing Settle the Wreckage in the future if he played the matchup, which I thought was funny. And then I had a brutal day 2 draft pod. So that's where I played Brad Nelson again. But in that draft, round 1 of the draft, I played Marcio Carvalho, and then round 2, I played Andrea Mengucci, and round 3, I played Brad Nelson.
I've never heard of any of those guys.
Oh yeah, no, they're all good. They're good players. Yeah, they're good players, for sure.
Like
they were
bronzes, they got their RPTQs. They got in.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Something.
Okay. All right.
Or like 3, 5 in the world, 3rd and 5th in the world, and then like Gold Pro or something.
Oh yeah, maybe I don't know. It all gets confused.
But no, it was fun though. Pro Tours are always great. They're really tough tournaments. I actually played against a listener. I think it was Ethan. Super nice. So shout out to him.
Awesome.
He kicked my butt.
Oh, well, happens.
It does happen indeed.
All right, Danny. Well, thank you for sitting down again to talk a little constructed. I know you don't normally get to do that, but everyone can catch you on limited time only sometime in the next week or so. I think it's gonna be weird because of the GP, but we'll figure it out.
We always do.
All
we do eventually. But thank you, Mason. You the best.
No worries. I'm glad to do it. It was fun. It's fun to do a little one-on-one constructed thing. We don't get to do that.
I know. It felt weird. I'm not normally. I'm like, I kind of am like embarrassed to talk about my horrible bruise, but it's fun. I enjoy myself in constructed.
Yeah, and people like this deck, and while I was big on this deck last format, I haven't played it yet, so maybe I'll take it for a spin one day.
It's not too bad. It just needs a better sideboard strategy.
I miss Deck and Stone too much. That's the truth. All right. Well, thank you so much, Danny, and thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Have a good one.